God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
So, first, let me say thank you to those of you who joined me last night for the Wednesday night live show. We had a little technical difficulties because StreamYard was acting up, but it was fun. It was informative. It was insightful. I learned a lot. So, I thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I thank you for hanging in there with me throughout that technical disaster. So, this morning, you guys got me thinking. I couldn't remember Sergeant Barrow's testimony from last time. I couldn't remember it. I remember seeing him. I remember something about cracked taillights, but I didn't remember any of the details. And then it didn't take long for me to realize why.
All right, whenever you're ready, Mr. Lally.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Morning.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
Because last time, of course, it was Adam Lally who called Nicholas Burrows to the stand, and the defense didn't cross-examine him because he told a very similar story to what he told us this time. Only it came out very differently because it was Lally who called him to the stand, not the defense. And this time, the emphasis was on the difference between the taillight that we were presented by Hank Brennan, the completely blown out taillight, and not on the fact that it was cracked. Another thing that Lally emphasizes is that there was a dent near the cracked taillight. So it appears to be Lally presenting him as more evidence of there being a collision and not to highlight the distinction. And this is another example of how Hank Brennan has mistakenly decided to hide or influence the evidence in such a way as to try to just streamline, I guess you want to say, the case to make it more simple or match his narrative without any bothersome interference from that which does not match the narrative. But the problem with that is it has allowed the defense team to make much bigger points with much less information. Now, the other thing that came out last night in the live was whether or not the defense should be bringing more to light from the people in the house, whether or not Brian Albert should be more involved, whether or not Brian Higgins should be called to the stand, because there's missing information. We all know, for example, that these guys had that whole butt dial conversation in the middle of the night. We know that Brian Albert, Mr. Big shot, scary Brian Albert, the Boston police officer who had a reputation that precedes him, he clearly a extremely highly reputable and revered, even maybe in some circles, cop, a big tough guy, strong guy cop, didn't come out of his house the morning of January 29th, despite the fact that there is a cavalcade of police and firefighters, and all of which is on his front lawn, which is adjacent just underneath his bedroom window. And oh, yeah, there's a 90-pound German Shepherd who's allegedly sleeping right next to his bed. And of course, that's impossible because if there really was a 90-pound German Shepherd in that house, unless it was muzzled or somebody tranquilized it, it would have been having a nervous breakdown, and everybody on the outside of that house, I don't care how much wind there was that night, would have heard that dog. Because German Shepherds alert their owners. much like every other dog that has ever existed. So those details will not be clear to this jury because it is very likely that the defense team is not going to bring any more information than they already have from Brian Higgins or Brian Albert into the equation because they've already done an incredible job of presenting potential motives that were completely ignored by the police. And that then brings me to Mr. Michael Proctor. Now, I was of the opinion that the defense should call him because there's really no downside. Michael Proctor is such a jackass that I believe there's virtually no way he could redeem himself, that there's no way Hank Brennan could possibly paint Michael Proctor in a more favorable light because he's the quintessential emotional, ignorant cop. He's the epitome of everything none of us want in a police officer, and he oozes it so much so that there's no way that any of us could feel sympathy for this man, except unless somehow Mr. Hank Brennan decides to make it very clear that he is the fall guy for a much more blatantly corrupt police force throughout Norfolk County, the Massachusetts State Police, and Boston PD, which I very seriously doubt Mr. Hank Brennan was planning to do. So I was of the opinion, and I am of the opinion, that there's nothing to lose by bringing Michael Proctor into the equation. But I get it. If we're streamlining, let's streamline. And I thought this was really interesting. So as I was thinking about what I wanted to focus on in this video, I stumbled upon this interview. Now, I had seen this interview before this trial, the second trial started, and ignored it. I mean, I saw clips from it, but I thought this was a fascinating and very telling interview, and will help us to understand Mr. Michael Proctor. And what I want to do today is review his text messages, because in all of the insanity that occurred over the last 3 days with these defense witnesses, with Ms. Veruca Salt, Kelly Devers, and the bombshell she dropped, and then Sergeant Barrows, Mr. Hero, and with Lucky, Marie Russell, and everything else that went on over the last few days, somehow Proctor's text messages kind of went under the radar. Now, we have no idea how the jury reacted to any of that. At this point, as it stands, all we know is that there are ferocious note takers on the jury, which I'm thrilled about. It also indicates to me that we shouldn't get too nervous if they take a few days in jury deliberations, because they're going to have a lot of information to go back and review, which is great, because I don't see how reviewing that information isn't favorable to the defense. So let's take a closer look at those text messages, but I want to highlight a few things along the way. Now, the brilliant editing job by WCVB ABC5 makes it sound like these people are suggesting that Michael Proctor absolutely did frame Karen Reed, which I think is hilarious. So check this out.
Is there any doubt in your mind that Michael Proctor might have framed Karen Reed?
No doubt whatsoever in our mind.
That
No
he
doubt
did.
whatsoever, and the evidence shows that. The investigations show that.
During Reed's first trial, Proctor did admit to writing insulting text messages about her, including that he hoped she would kill herself.
Because the evidence pointed to this woman killing a fellow Boston police officer. So he was angry, he was upset by that. So I understand the need that he had to vent to friends, whether...
Now, let's remember that the text messages that we're talking about, he was not fired for venting to his friends. He wasn't even fired because of the she should kill herself text message, although that's what they're trying to project here. He was fired because within hours of the investigation, he had stopped investigating because he concluded without further investigation that this whack job CUNT was responsible for killing Boston police officer John O'Keefe, who he was so outraged about. That's what he was fired for.
It was appropriate or not.
Elizabeth and Courtney Proctor say those messages do not justify the harassment they say they've received from Reed's supporters, including rocks thrown in their yards and anonymous voicemails like this.
I'm going to be your kid's new mommy, and I'm taking your kids and I'm taking your dogs.
A blogger named Aidan Carney, who goes by the name Turtle Boy, has been charged with witness intimidation in this case, but the Proctors say he's not the only one responsible.
It seems like Karen Reed and Aidan have been conspiring and colluding.
Of course, they've been conspiring and colluding, except for one inconvenient fact that a grand jury of your peers, dear, concluded definitively there is no collusion. So I like how she's trying to throw Karen Reed under the bus again, instead of course, as is perfectly typical of Michael Proctor and his, by extension, friends and family. They take no responsibility whatsoever for their role in this disaster. They just keep pointing fingers at everybody else. Brilliant job by you, dear.
Now, prosecutors have said that Carney and Reed have been communicating, but at this point she is not charged with witness intimidation. Recently, the prosecutors confirmed that a federal investigation into potential misconduct connected to the Reed case concluded without charging Proctor or anyone else. His family say that the feds checked 5 years worth of personal emails and text messages and found no other problems. Live in Canton, David Bieniek, WCVB News Center.
So I thought that was very interesting. The fact that, of course, they completely ignored the real reason why he was fired, because of his obtuse investigation and complete and total confirmation bias. This is a lead investigator who concludes within 10 hours, without ever going to 34 Fairview, that Karen Reed hit John O'Keefe, never investigates inside the house, never even does a loop around the house or even the property for that matter, to determine whether or not there was an accident, whether there was evidence somewhere else. Just says, oh, yep, he never came into the house because my boy, Brian Albert, my family friends, longtime close family friends, the Alberts, said that they didn't come into the house. Why wouldn't we believe them? Had to be Karen Reed, right? And the thing that's really, I think, the most unnerving about this, and really the reason why Michael Proctor should be fired over and over again, it's not because he was talking improperly about Karen Reed, although, believe me, that's horrific. To me, though, that's indicative of a much larger problem, which is the fact that he didn't think twice about doing that. Didn't think twice about saying to all of his bosses on a text thread, I'm looking for nudes, which says a lot, should say a lot to all of us about this group of people and what these guys are really like. But more importantly, this is supposed to be an investigator, a detective, a police detective who stops investigating. And not only that, has decided so definitively that she did this not only Michael Proctor, but the whole group. Because let's be fair, he didn't plant the evidence himself. We've got the chief of police driving by weeks later as evidence reveals itself. And to my point, that is what we get from Proctor's text messages. We get everything you need to know about this entire case. This man certainly has no business being a detective for anyone at any time, anywhere. But you have to ask yourself, do any of these other guys really belong in that role? Let's see what we learned from Proctor's texts, shall we? Here we go. So at 10:52 p.m. on the same night of the day that John O'Keefe is found at 34 Fairview, Michael Proctor is on a text thread, a long-standing text thread with his elementary school friends. And 16 hours after John O'Keefe's body is found, approximately 10 hours after Michael Proctor is officially on the case, this is the conversation he is having with his childhood friends. Keep in mind that his nicknames are Chip and Bear. So when you see Chip, that is Michael Proctor. So 10:52, a friend asks Chip, name of the BP cop. And he responds a minute later, John O'Keefe. How old was he? At 10:53, he says, well, he took custody of his sister's kids. And his friend says, oh man, that's rough. And he responds mid-40s. And then he sends a link to John O'Keefe's Facebook page. And somebody says, what's that? I don't have the book anymore. And Proctor says, this one is a nightmare. Think about the kids. That's awful. So the first thing we learn from Michael Proctor is that he feels a sense of righteous indignation about the fact that this cop was killed. So there's emotion here. He feels angry. One of our own was wrongfully murdered. Okay? And think about those kids. Okay. Bird says, I'm sure the owner of the house will receive some shit, though. And Proctor says, nope. The homeowner is a Boston cop, too. So what is the second thing that we learned from Michael Proctor very quickly in these text messages? That there is absolutely no way that the guy in the house is going to be a suspect. No way. He's one of us. He's a Boston cop too. That is the reason that he gives. And not only that, I'll jump the gun and take this a step further. There are many times that his friends ask for his name. And even though these are his elementary school friends, Michael Proctor will not give them the man's name. He will not say Brian Albert. And if that doesn't speak volumes, I don't know what does. He must have been a puddle to accomplish that. Who's the homeowner? I hope not, but I can see it. In other words, his friend is implying that Brian Albert is responsible. Of course, because logically, you got a cop dead on another cop's lawn, and you're trying to say that those two things have no relationship with each other, that that's just a coincidence, which is exactly what he's suggesting. Proctor says, she waffled him. I looked at his body at the hospital. She waffled him. He was banged up. I thought he was drunk. Did he get beat up? Nope. So Bird is trying to put all this together, and he says, so the owner of the house was a woman cop that beat him? And Proctor says, well, that's what I initially thought after talking to Canton paramedics, but then I saw the guy. Okay, so what does she waffled him mean? What's the story? And Proctor says, she hit him with her car. So what's the next thing that we learn? He is definitively certain that John was hit by a car. Now, given everything you know about this case and everything you know about the injuries and everything you know about the ME, what indicates a car crash? Well, if you ask Buchanan and Proctor, it's the fact that he didn't have his shoes on. That was it. That was the definitive proof that they needed to say he was hit by a car. His shoes were off. Now, let's think about this. If John had walked into that house, knowing what we know about his OCD with taking your shoes off at the door, do you think it's possible that he took his shoes off when he walked into the house? Now, it wouldn't surprise me if these two morons don't think that way, because certainly I can guarantee you that Michael Proctor doesn't take his shoes off when he walks into other people's homes, because he's not that thoughtful. He's too self-involved. He doesn't give a crap about what other people want. So he's got his mind made up, 100%. She hit him with his car. Oh, Jesus. Okay, that's fucked. And then what do we learn next? Intentional or not. Proctor cannot tell us that it was intentional. And he doesn't care, frankly. He doesn't care if it's intentional or not. That is important. 10 hours into his investigation, he believes she hit him with the car, and he doesn't care whether it was intentional or not. And I will explain why more in a minute. Gotcha. He was frozen in the driveway and she didn't see him? And then Proctor says, that's another animal we won't be able to prove. So what does that tell us? One of the more important details about this investigation comes right here and right now. Michael Proctor is very aware of what he will and won't be able to prove, which tells us, because he's saying it, that it was in his head, that he knows he doesn't have evidence. Because he doesn't say, that's another animal we will have to prove. That's not what he says. What he says is, that's another animal we won't be able to prove, meaning that's another, which implies what? That there are other things he knows he can't prove also, right? Like, for example, an indication of a car accident. Because remember, the CERT team has already found a couple of pieces of taillight. So all of that has already happened. They have already decided they did not have enough evidence to prove there was a car accident. And now he's telling us, in addition to that, they won't be able to prove whether it was intentional or not. Okay. So now he's giving us his theory of the case. And think about how absurd this is. They arrived at the house together, got into an argument. She was driving and left. Now, how would he know that? And remember something important. There was no fight. There was no fight. I don't understand why anyone thinks there was a fight. We know they were arguing earlier in the day. We see them at C.F. McCarthy's when they're reunited after their argument all day. We watch them walk across the street to the waterfall where he's kissing her forehead and they're flirting and everyone's happy. We see them walk out of the waterfall. We know what time they left, 12:14. We know what time they arrived, 12:23. Karen Reed has an anxious attachment style. If they were fighting in that car in the 9 minutes that they were in it, there's no chance that she lets him walk out of that car. Karen chases. Okay, that is what she does. She chases to get that attention. She wants more of him, not less of him. She's not trying to kill him or get rid of him. She's looking to get more of him, more time, more attention, more engagement, not less. And this is so absurd that it's like unimaginable to me that anyone could think anything else. And I understand why people don't understand what I'm saying, but because I do understand what I'm saying, there is no world where she would have ever intentionally murdered John O'Keefe. I mean, it is obscene to think that. Now, could she have accidentally clipped him, like she said? Anything is possible. But they were not fighting. And so this idea that they were fighting, maybe Karen thought that when she woke up the next day. Why? Well, yeah, because she was fighting with him. But he never texted her. He never called her. Nobody ever heard him say a bad word because he was gone by then. So there was no fight. A fight has to be two ways, right? Interactive. And Karen could have been very confused about what had happened because she woke up screaming and yelling and thinking he was cheating on her. And I imagine was pretty disoriented, with 2 hours of sleep and having experienced the most extreme trauma states that a person possibly could in those early morning hours. But there was no fight. And once again, here we go. What's the name of the Canton cop living in Canton? The one involved. The BPT. Then he asked, the BPD have any jurisdiction here because it was their own? And then another question. But I assume you guys are out to make it cut and dry because it involves cops, right? And then Bird says, something here stinks. Because these guys aren't idiots, right? So then Proctor says, yeah, but there will be some serious charges brought on the girl. So now we know that whether they have evidence or not, whether it was intentional or not, they plan to bring some serious charges on the girl. And 5051 says, I can only imagine what internal affairs at the Boston Police Department are trying to get out there. Right? What's the story? Because 2 cops, one in the house, one is dead outside of his house. Right? Then we have 5051 chime in. Is she hot at least? And then I ask you, how would Michael Proctor know this? From all accounts, he didn't do anything wrong. Who didn't do anything wrong? Oh, Brian Albert didn't do anything wrong. That's who he's talking about. The cop in the house didn't do anything wrong. But she, Karen Reed, is a whack job CUNT. How does Michael Proctor know that? What in God's name would give this moron That impression, what could have possibly given him that impression? Because during the most traumatic moments of her life, she was running around hysterical. That's why she's a whack job. What are the other indicators that he could possibly have 10 hours after he's officially signed the case? What could he possibly have learned in that time? Talk about jumping to conclusions. I mean, this guy didn't have her phone, or at least didn't have the ability to look through it yet. What does he know about her? Nothing. He spoke to Jen McCabe. He spoke to the medical examiner, who, by the way, did not think it was a car accident. So then he chimes in even further, making things even worse, digging the hole bigger, worse, deeper. Yeah, she's hot. She's a babe with a weird Fall River accent, though. No ass. Yeah, she's a babe with a weird Fall River accent, though. No ass. So now we get the rating about Karen Reed's looks from Proctor. And then Bird says, well, no ass, not newsworthy then. And then 5051 says, oh, she's skating because she's attractive. And then we learn, once again, Michael Proctor says, 0 chance she skates. This is really important to pay attention to, guys. 0 chance she skates. She's fucked. Now, why would he say that? Okay. I really want you to stop and ask yourself this question. What does he mean when he says this? 0 chance she skates. She's fucked. Why would he know that? How would he know there's 0 chance she skates? Well, we get the answer. Here it is. Here's the answer. This is how we know. This is how he knows. All the powers that be want answers ASAP. This is how Michael Proctor knows she's fucked. Because it's not just him making these decisions. Once again, I absolutely stand by the fact Michael Proctor is a trooper. He is the lowest man on the totem pole, and everything in these law enforcement agencies is about rank and hierarchy. These guys are taught to fall in line. And what do we learn from the text messages with Proctor and the other cops in this case? Here he is on a text thread with his bosses, John Fanning, Lieutenant Fanning, and Sergeant Buchanan. They send a picture of David Yianetti in his old army fatigues or military fatigues. And then what does Proctor say? This is in August of 2022. Funny, I'm going through his retarded client's phone. No nudes so far. I hate that man. I truly hate him. Now, I ask you, why would you hate David Yianetti? Think about how absurd that is. I'm going through his retarded client's phone. Classy guy, this Michael Proctor. But the most important thing about these statements is who he's saying them to. Not thinking much about making these statements with all these guys on this text chain. Now, a few days later, on February 1st, Proctor sends a picture of Karen Reed being arrested. One of his friends writes, "Is that chick a smoke?" Question mark. Proctor says, nutbag, as Chief would say. And by Chief, though on the stand he denies it, I have absolutely no doubt that this is Chief Berkowitz, because he's the only chief that this guy interacts with on the regular. No other chief in Michael Proctor's universe. And then, like the classy guy he is, he says, she's got a leaky balloon knot. It leaks poo. So you wonder why this guy was fired. Not only are these statements disgraceful and disgusting and chauvinistic, indicative of the culture at the police department, the Massachusetts State Police Department. These are the detectives that are a part of the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office. That's who this group of people are. These are the guys that investigate crimes so that the DA can convict people of them. Pretty freaking scary. And then you start to wonder, how many other times have they planted evidence to try to get a conviction? So these are the important text messages. And think about everything that we learn from these text messages. Because everything that comes after them, everything is summed up within 16 hours of John O'Keefe being found on the lawn at 34 Fairview, thanks to Michael Proctor and his text chain with his elementary school pals. And I ask you, do you think he's still on that text chain today? What do you think? Because my money would be that he absolutely is. Because one thing we can be sure of with Michael Proctor, he's not the sharpest tool in the shed. That is for sure.
God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep. I love everything.